Two very special guests. Susan?
Thanks, Bliss. Yes, I'm in the WRTI Performance Studio with Astral artist, flutist Annie Wu, and her duo partner, Feng Niu, who are going to give us a sneak preview of Annie's Astral recital, which is tomorrow. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Now, that recital is tomorrow at November 2nd, 7:30 at Church of the Holy Trinity at Rittenhouse Square. It has an intriguing theme. It's called Folk, Fantasy, and Flute. What is that? Let's hear it. Wow, that was really beautiful. So if you're just joining us, we're in the WRTI Performance Studio with flutist Annie Wu and her duo partner, Feng Niu. And you're giving us highlights of your Astral recital, which is tomorrow.
Yes, we're very excited.
So tell us a little bit about that first piece and how it fits into this theme. The theme is folk, fantasy, and flute.
Sure. Thierry Lancino's piece was actually written for the radio. It was a commissioned piece by Radio France. And so Feng and I thought, what a fun way to start a radio session. The idea of this piece being that there were constraints, time constraints. So in a radio session, you probably want a piece that's 2 minutes. So each of these 5 movements in this 5 Caprices was meant to be very brief. So that was the first of the 5 Caprices. And if you come tomorrow, you'll hear the other 4. What I love about this piece is that the idea of a caprice is something that is playful. You know, you get a lot of freedom in that, but there are also these constraints. And I think what Thierry comes up with is something extremely mysterious and dark, as you've heard. And in all the movements, it's sort of a realm that the flute and piano rarely get to go into together. The flute usually is in a brighter mode, like the piece you'll hear next. So I think this really shows his creativity, and my former teacher, Paula Robeson at the New England Conservatory, commissioned Thierry to write the flute version of this piece that you just heard. It was originally for violin and piano.
Wow, so this folk and fantasy element you can really hear in different ways throughout the program.
Totally. I think the idea of having this theme, by the way, I'm speaking more because Feng has a horrible cold, so has chosen to be mute. The idea behind the program was that Feng and I had been working a lot with text. I studied comparative literature. We're going to talk about it a little later. Language and music have a really great relationship, and sometimes thinking about both of them can enlarge in what we think about in general. So this program is an exploration of how stories from the past, stories of things that we've just come up with on our own, can help create a really special experience. So the idea is to think about different stories in the flute especially. And a fun fact about this program is actually, I think, only one piece beyond Anna Klein's piece, which is written for this performance tomorrow, is written originally for the flute. They're all arrangements for this combination, so there's some fantasy in that as well.
Well, that's great. So tell us about the next piece.
Great, yeah, so we're going to be playing Robert Schumann's fantasy pieces, Fantasiestücke, Opus 73. So you may know this piece from the clarinet version. People play it on viola, people play it on cello. I heard a cellist play it in school last year, and I thought, oh my gosh, we have to play it on flute and piano version. So we found this version online by an arranger, and we sort of made some tweaks ourselves. So what's cool about arrangements is that sometimes people think, oh, it doesn't sound like the cello version, it doesn't sound like the clarinet version, but for this combination, it's the flute version, so it has its own characteristics and qualities with this key. Fantasy in the romantic sense for Schumann being an outpouring of emotion, of expression, and the genius of the composer, so this being very different than the piece you just heard.
Great. You're listening to WRTI live from the Performance Studio. We're also streaming live from our website. Video. That was so light and bright.
I know, very different, huh?
It was very different, and it reminded me that in your notes about your pieces in your program, you talk about experimenting and playing with the sound. It must be fun to kind of put a program together like this.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of sounds and thinking of text, the next piece we're going to be playing is the Schumann Mignon Lieder. And something that I think about a lot is with singers, when you have text, it's very neat that each note has a specific meaning attached to it. So if you were to say, I love you, you could say, I love you. That's very personal. Or I love you. Or I love you. All those mean very different things in a very explicit way. And if you play music in a way where you're attaching this sort of meaning, it just adds a whole new element of expression. And every time you play something, it can be different. So this last one you just heard, there's repeats, but each time it can have a little bit of flexibility in it. So I think having an exploration of sound is also connected to an exploration of stories. Actually, yesterday, or not yesterday, but this week, I work at the Juilliard School now, and one of the things I do is get to work on this class called Arts and Society. And one of the guests in the class was Alan Alda, and he was the great actor.
Yes.
So he was speaking about how every audience you have is different. Like when you play this program at the radio station, tomorrow in the church, every time is going to be different. And you have to really think about your audience as receiving that particular moment. So what I love about these songs and having the opportunity to do things with text is that you are telling a story, and as an audience member listening to a flute in particular play words, you have to participate in a way.
Wow.
Your audience has to think, what is she saying? What words is she emphasizing? And each time can be a little different.
That's so interesting. And your interest in storytelling, it's evident in your career path, which is kind of unusual. You started out, you're from the Bay Area,
Yes.
and you started out playing flute at what age?
I was 8 years old, which is a little young for flute players, but I'm glad I started.
And you started winning prizes at 12. And at 15, you recorded a YouTube recording of a piece called 3 Beats for Beatbox Flute.
Yeah, yes, I did. This video will truly follow me to my grave. It was really fun. It was actually part of a competition. I was 15 years old, and I did the National Flute Association high school soloist competition. And part of that is that a composer each year will write a piece, and the students are challenged to have 2 months to learn this piece and perform it. So I really worked hard, and I became the winner of the competition and the winner of this commissioned prize. And then I recorded this video in my living room, and it has since gone to sort of viral status online.
I understand over 2 million people have looked at it. So for the people who are outside those 2 million, is there a way you could demonstrate what it is?
Yes, we can do a snippet. Okay. Could you hold the mic? Sure. Is that helpful? Here, let's see.
That is so cool. Do you do that any other time? Have you been doing that?
Yeah, actually, I did it with Astral once. They had this big block party event, which I think WRTI is part of. It's just a really fun way to do something different than what I usually play. I most like playing it for kids. I've done a lot of sort of going into schools before I do orchestra concerts and sharing with the students why I love playing music and going to their band classes or something. So playing this first before you say anything, all the kids' jaws are like on the ground, and it really opens them up to playing other things. So we play that, and then you'll play Peter and the Wolf or Mozart, and then they're curious. They're like, wow, I can see myself playing this instrument, learning more about it. So I think it's been great.
It reinforces the idea that this instrument is a way to express yourself in whatever form you'd like.
Whatever way you want, exactly.
So, and I understand after you did this YouTube video, that led to a whole bunch of other things,
Yes.
like a TED Talk conference and your decision to go to Harvard,
Oh, yeah.
where you got a degree in comparative literature
Yeah.
and did a dual degree with New England Conservatory, where you studied flute.
Yeah. I like to say in a narrative sense, back to storytelling, that this piece sort of led to that because I ended up at this TED conference. I was sitting at the table with people who were doing really magnificent things, and I thought, I have this skill to play the flute. What other ways can I use my thinking and sort of broaden what I'm able to do with this? So I decided at that point to like pursue going to a university where I could have this music education as well. So it led to being at the conservatory in Harvard too.
And then you met Feng Niu.
Yeah. So I started doing more concerts my sophomore year, and I reached out to Feng's teacher, Pei-Shan Li, at the New Conservatory, and I asked, I really want a great student to play with all the time, and she recommended Feng. We began playing together, and it's been 4 years now.
That's great. Now, this next piece also arose out of your collaboration.
Yes. My senior year of my degree in comparative literature, I needed to do a thesis project, and I knew I didn't want to just write a paper, even though I like writing, so I came to Feng with this idea that I wanted to create an album that would think about music and literature together, but wasn't like a themed album. So I think oftentimes people will do bird songs and then put a lot of bird songs in, or even myself this time doing folk and fantasy. It's like it's a way to bring people in, but it's not necessarily something you sit down to and listen, and it needs to be in a specific order. So the album became a way to think about how does one story progress throughout history, and this next piece is Schumann's Mignon, Kennst du das Land, and it talks about this girl's story because she's been abducted. It's a story of Goethe's, and I think it's so beautiful, Schumann's version, because he really goes into the internal feelings of this girl. Instead of saying, there's the beautiful land of Italy, which is the first line, she gets to really sing her sorrow. So you'll hear the pain in the music, which expands the story.
Okay, great. You're listening to WRTI live from the WRTI Performance Studio, flutist Annie Wu and Feng Niu, pianist. Wow, there was such drama in that music. And for those people watching on YouTube on our video, you also seem to be acting it out.
Yeah, I think that's fun. I mean, Susan, you can actually see on the music it says mignon instead of flute. I think that's one of my favorite parts about playing this vocal music. You are an actual character in a very, very literal way. That's not the same as, for example, the Schumann you just heard earlier, which is more of a general fantasy. So it's really great going into the psyche of this young girl who's been abandoned, is trying to ask, like, do you know what happened to me? It's very painful, and Schumann does a great job of illustrating that.
Right. Well, I could just sitting there listening, and I'm sure the listeners could just feel your heart sort of going out to you.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow, that's exciting. Well, you seem so drawn to storytelling and music's power to tell stories.
Yeah.
Your biography talks of music's possibility to connect, communicate, and exact change. You would talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think it's just because it's on my mind, going back to this class with Alan Alden, he was talking about, you always have to make sure that your audience is with you. And I think it's difficult when you play classical music to play music that was written a long time ago, like the Schumann isn't written yesterday, and to be able to let people in. And so I think a way to do that is through sharing these stories, telling this story. I think one of the most meaningful things that I've done with Astral has been able to share my album project with a live audience before the album was released. And so many people came up to me afterwards and said, oh, when I was a young girl, I sang this Tchaikovsky song when I was in choir. Or, this reminded me of this book I had read. I knew about Mignon from this opera. So people connect to stories, and if you let people into these stories, then any type of music can be theirs, regardless of if they have training. So I think that's the special part.
That's great. So what is the last piece you'll play for us?
The last piece is Gabriella Lena Frank's Dreams of Chambi, which is a really special piece. It involves alto flute, and it's huge, the full masterpiece. We will be playing the fourth movement, which is, basically this piece is another interdisciplinary example. The idea is that she saw this album of photographs by Martin Chambi, who was the first Amer-Indian photographer to gain international acclaim. And this photo in particular is of women dancing a native dance, and they have percussion instruments around their ankles, and the idea of the dance is it's sort of a battle, so you're going to hear some antagonizing. They hold these really long sticks while they dance, and the idea is to balance it as you do this intricate footwork. So you're going to hear a lot of the different instruments emulated and a battle between the two of us.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, you're listening to WRTI live from the Performance Studio. Great. what a fun piece to conclude
it's
the
fun.
program. That was great. Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Annie
me.
Wu and Feng Niu, thank you so much for coming in. A reminder that your recital, Annie's recital, is tomorrow. It's called Folk, Fantasy, and Flute. It's tomorrow, November 2nd at 7:30 p.m. at the Church of the Holy Trinity on Rittenhouse Square. Thanks so much for taking time to come and play at the WRTI Performance Studio.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening.
Great. Thanks. Back to you, Bliss.